The first shot came without warning, cutting through the silence of the cold Montana night like a knife. Owen Xanders dropped to the ground, dust filling his lungs as he pressed himself against the hard, packed earth. The cattle scattered, their panicked lowing adding to the chaos as more gunfire erupted around the perimeter of the small herd he'd been driving toward Abilene, Kansas. It was April 1875, and Owen was down to his last dollar and his last hope. Now, bandits were determined to take even that from him. "Damn it all," he muttered, drawing his revolver as he crawled behind a fallen log. His horse, a reliable chestnut gelding named Copper, had bolted at the first shot. The cattle he'd scraped together over months of back-breaking work were scattering to the four winds. All he had left was his gun, the clothes on his back, and the burning determination not to die in this God-forsaken stretch of nowhere. Another shot splintered the wood inches from his face. Owen returned fire, aiming at the muzzle flash in the distance. A cry told him he'd hit something or someone. The shooting paused momentarily. "You're outnumbered, Cowboy," a gruff voice called from the darkness. "We just want the cattle. Walk away and you'll live to see morning." Owen's jaw clenched. Those cattle represented his last chance to start over, to build something of his own after losing the family ranch to drought and debt. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "A Xanders never quits. Come and get them," he shouted back, knowing full well it was foolish bravado. 4, maybe 5 against 1 weren't odds any gambling man would take. The shooting resumed with increased intensity. Owen fired until his cylinder emptied, then made a desperate dash toward a cluster of rocks 20 yards away. A searing pain tore through his side as he ran, but adrenaline carried him forward until he collapsed behind the meager shelter. His hand came away wet and sticky when he pressed it to his side. Blood. Not enough to kill him quickly, but without attention, it would do the job eventually. The night grew quiet as he tore a strip from his shirt to bind the wound. When dawn broke hours later, Owen awoke to find his cattle gone, his horse nowhere in sight, and his wound throbbing mercilessly. He was alone, bleeding and miles from the nearest settlement. With grim determination, he pushed himself to his feet and started walking. By midday, the Montana sun beat down on him without mercy. His water was gone, his wound was seeping through the makeshift bandage, and the horizon wavered before his eyes. Each step became an act of sheer will. Just a little further, he told himself, though he had no idea where further might lead. As the sun began its descent, Owen saw smoke rising in the distance. Hope flared briefly, only to be tempered by caution. Friend or foe, he had little choice but to investigate. His legs trembled beneath him as he approached what appeared to be a small homestead nestled against the foothills. It was a modest place, a sturdy cabin with a barn and corral off to the side. A vegetable garden stretched behind the cabin, and chickens pecked at the ground nearby. To Owen's parched eyes and desperate heart, it looked like paradise. He was halfway across the open yard when his legs finally gave out. As he collapsed to his knees, the cabin door swung open. Through blurring vision, he saw a figure rushing toward him, sunlight glinting off auburn hair. "Help!" he managed to croak before darkness claimed him. The first sensation Owen registered was softness beneath his head. The second was the cool touch of a damp cloth against his brow. He forced his eyes open, blinking against the light of an oil lamp. "You're awake." The voice was gentle but firm, with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "Don't try to move too quickly. You've lost blood." His vision cleared enough to reveal a young woman sitting beside the bed where he lay. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical knot, and her eyes, a striking deep green, studied him with a mixture of concern and wariness. She wore a simple blue dress with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, revealing forearms tanned by outdoor work. "Where am I?" Owen's voice came out as a rasp. "My farm." She dipped the cloth into a basin of water and wrung it out before placing it back on his forehead. "About 15 miles east of Clearwater Creek. I'm Olivia Porter." Memory rushed back the ambush, the long walk collapsing in her yard. "Owen Xanders," he replied. "I'm sorry to impose, madam. I was heading to Abilene when I was attacked. Rustlers took my cattle and my horse." Something like sympathy crossed her features, but the wariness remained. "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Xanders. That bullet tore a good piece of flesh from your side, but it didn't hit anything vital. I cleaned and stitched it while you were unconscious." Owen tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his side. "I'm obliged to you, Miss Porter. Once I'm able, I'll be on my way." She pressed him gently back onto the bed. "You won't be going anywhere for at least a few days, not if you want those stitches to hold. And it's Mrs. Porter, though my husband's been gone these 3 years now." Owen lay back, too weak to argue. "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," she said matter-of-factly. "Once you're well enough to stand, I expect you'll earn your keep. There's plenty of work on a farm that needs doing, and I've been managing alone too long." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "For tonight, you need rest. We can discuss terms in the morning." As she turned to leave, Owen caught her wrist. "Why help me? You don't know me from Adam." Olivia looked down at his hand on her wrist, then met his gaze steadily. "I know what it's like to be desperate, Mr. Xanders. I couldn't leave a man to die on my doorstep any more than I could shoot one of my own animals for sport." She gently extracted her wrist from his grasp. "Now rest. There's broth on the stove if you wake hungry." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Owen alone with his thoughts. Through the small window, he could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He was alive, sheltered, and for the moment, safe, all thanks to a woman he'd never met before today. "Just for the night," he murmured to himself, knowing that once he was strong enough, he'd need to move on. His dream of starting his own ranch hadn't died with the loss of his cattle. Somehow, he'd find a way to begin again. Sleep claimed him before he could form any concrete plans, his body demanding the rest it needed to heal. Owen awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him he hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. The pain in his side had dulled to a persistent ache, and when he cautiously sat up, the room stayed remarkably steady. The door opened, and Olivia entered carrying a tray. She looked different in the morning light, younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a sprinkling of freckles across her nose and cheeks that he hadn't noticed the night before. "Good morning," she said, setting the tray on a small table beside the bed. "You look better. How do you feel?" "Like I've been kicked by a mule, but I'll live." Owen managed a small smile. "Thanks to you," she nodded, pouring coffee into a cup and handing it to him. "Drink this. Then we'll see if you can manage some food." The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what he needed. After the first few sips, he felt more human than he had in days. "This is mighty fine coffee, Mrs. Porter." "Olivia," she corrected, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "If you're staying a few days, we might as well dispense with formalities." "Owen, then," he replied. "And I appreciate the shelter, Olivia, but I can't stay long. I need to get to Abilene." She raised an eyebrow. "With no horse, no money, and a wound that could open up if you push yourself too hard. That seems unwise." He couldn't argue with her logic, but the thought of imposing further didn't sit well with him. "I can work for a few days to repay you, then be on my way." Olivia studied him thoughtfully. "I have a proposition for you, Owen. I need help around this place, real help, not just for a few days." The roof needs patching before winter, the north fence is falling down, and I can't manage the harvest alone come fall. What are you suggesting? Stay through the harvest. Help me get this place in shape for winter. In return, I'll provide room, board, and when the crops are sold, enough money for you to continue to Abilene with a new horse and supplies. She held up a hand when he started to protest. It's not charity. It's an arrangement that benefits us both. Owen considered her offer. It would delay his plans, but it would also give him time to heal properly and earn the means to start over. And there was something about this woman, her self-sufficiency, her directness, that intrigued him. Through the harvest, he agreed finally. But I pull my own weight starting today. A hint of a smile crossed her face. We'll see about that. First, eat your breakfast. Then we'll change that bandage and see if you can stand without falling over. The bacon and eggs disappeared quickly, followed by 2 slices of homemade bread with fresh butter. It was the best meal Owen had eaten in months, and he said as much. It's simple fare, Olivia replied, but he could tell she was pleased by the compliment. When he'd finished eating, she helped him sit on the edge of the bed while she changed his bandage. Her hands were gentle but efficient, and Owen found himself watching her face as she worked. There was a quiet strength in her features, and though she rarely smiled when she did, it transformed her face completely. The wound is clean, she pronounced, securing a fresh bandage. No signs of infection. You're lucky. Seems luck has finally decided to find me, Owen said. With her help, he stood, testing his weight carefully. His legs felt weak, but they held him. See, right as rain. Olivia gave him a skeptical look. Don't overdo it. Start slow. Yes, madam, he replied with a hint of teasing that surprised even him. It had been a long time since he'd felt light enough to jest. She rolled her eyes but didn't reprimand him. There's a spare shirt of my husband's in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Your own was beyond saving. As she left him to dress, Owen found himself wondering about the man who had been her husband. The room he occupied was plainly a guest room, not the master bedroom, so at least he wasn't sleeping in a dead man's bed. Small mercies. The shirt was a bit tight across the shoulders but otherwise fit well enough. Moving slowly, he made his way out of the bedroom and into the main part of the cabin. It was a simple home, but clean and well kept. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, 4 chairs, a small sofa, and a rocking chair arranged near the fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked for a frontier home. Olivia was at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. She glanced up as he entered. I thought we might start with something simple. The chicken coop needs cleaning and the eggs need collecting. Owen nodded. Lead the way. The chicken coop was at the back of the property, a short walk that left Owen more winded than he cared to admit. Olivia pretended not to notice his labored breathing, for which he was grateful. The hens are laying well this spring, she said, handing him a basket. Watch out for Matilda, she's the speckled one with the attitude. She'll peck your hands if you're not careful. Working together, they cleaned the coop and collected 24 eggs. By the time they finished, sweat beaded on Owen's brow and his side throbbed, but he refused to complain. This woman had been managing everything alone for 3 years. The least he could do was push through a little discomfort. As they walked back to the house, Owen took in more of the property. It was modest but well planned. A vegetable garden, the chicken coop, a small orchard of apple trees that would bear fruit in the fall, and fields beyond that were freshly planted. How much land do you have? He asked. 80 acres, Olivia replied. My husband Thomas staked our claim 5 years ago. We came out from Pennsylvania with dreams of building something of our own. A shadow crossed her face. He died from pneumonia the winter before last. I've been keeping the place going since then. Alone. That's a mighty task for one person, she shrugged. What choice did I have? This is my home. I wasn't about to abandon it. Owen understood that sentiment all too well. He'd fought to save his family's ranch until the bitter end, leaving only when the bank foreclosed, and the new owners made it clear he wasn't welcome to stay on as a hand. What about family? He asked. Don't you have folks back east who worry about you? My parents died when I was 16. I worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia until I met Thomas. Her voice softened slightly at the mention of her husband's name. He was the only family I had. They reached the cabin, and Olivia took the basket of eggs from him. Rest for a bit, she said. You've done enough for your first day up. Owen wanted to protest, but found he lacked the energy. Instead, he sank onto the sofa while Olivia busied herself with the eggs, separating those to be sold from those they would use. Tell me about Abilene, she said without looking up from her task. What's waiting for you there? Nothing specific, Owen admitted. I heard the cattle market is good there, and I thought I might find work as a ranch hand, save up to start my own place someday. He leaned his head back against the sofa. My family had a ranch in Colorado, but we lost it last year. Drought killed the grazing land, and the bank wouldn't extend our loans. I'm sorry, Olivia said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice. It's hard to lose your home. It is, he agreed, but I'm not one to dwell on what can't be changed. I scraped together enough for a small herd, thought I'd drive them to Abilene and use the profit as a new start. He gave a bitter laugh. That plan didn't work out so well. Rustlers are getting bolder, Olivia said, wiping her hands on her apron. Last month they hit the Jenkins place 10 miles north of here. Took every head of cattle and shot Mr. Jenkins when he tried to stop them. Did he survive? She nodded. Barely. The sheriff says there's a gang working this territory, but he doesn't have enough deputies to patrol effectively. Owen's jaw tightened. Would you recognize any of them if you saw them again? It was dark, he replied, and they kept their distance, but I'd know their leader's voice. He paused, then added, not that it matters much now, they're long gone with my cattle. Olivia studied him for a moment. Don't go getting ideas about hunting them down, Owen Xanders. That's a fool's errand that will only get you killed. He was surprised by her vehemence. I wasn't planning on it. Good. She returned to her work, and Owen found himself watching her the efficient way she moved, the slight furrow between her brows when she concentrated. There was something compelling about Olivia Porter, something beyond her obvious beauty, a resilience that spoke to him. The days fell into a pattern. Owen's strength returned gradually, and with it, his ability to help around the farm. He started with small tasks, fetching water from the well, collecting eggs, feeding the chickens, and progressed to more strenuous work as his wound healed. Olivia proved to be a patient teacher, showing him the particulars of farm life that differed from ranching. He learned to tend the vegetable garden, to recognize which plants needed what kind of care, to repair fencing and tools with the limited supplies they had on hand. In the evenings, they would sit at the table or by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Olivia had a collection of books that surprised Owen with its breadth, everything from practical farming manuals to poetry and novels. My husband believed education shouldn't stop just because we moved west, she explained one evening when Owen commented on the collection. He would read aloud to me while I mended or sewed. Do you miss it? Owen asked. The reading, I mean. A look of surprise crossed her face. I suppose I do. I still read to myself, but it's not the same as sharing a story with someone. Without thinking too much about it, Owen picked up a volume of Whitman's Leaves of Grass that lay on the table. I'm no scholar, but I can read well enough if you'd like. The smile she gave him then was worth any self-consciousness he might have felt. That night, he read poetry aloud while she darned socks, and it felt more like home than anywhere had since he'd lost the ranch. As April gave way to May, the days grew longer and warmer. The crops Olivia had planted began to sprout, painting the fields with lines of green. Owen found himself increasingly invested in the success of the farm, taking pride in the straight rows of corn and the sturdy fence he'd rebuilt along the northern property line. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Olivia surprised him with a question. "Why cattle, Owen? Why not try farming instead of ranching?" He considered the question seriously. "I grew up on a cattle ranch. It's what I know best. There's something about working with animals instead of just the land that appeals to me." He smiled slightly. "And I suppose there's more freedom in it. Cattle can be moved if the land goes bad. Crops are at the mercy of whatever weather comes." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "I can understand that. Though there's something to be said for putting down roots, for being part of a community rather than always moving." "Is that why you stayed?" "For the community," she laughed, a sound he'd come to cherish for its rarity. "What community?" "My nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and the town is a half-day's ride." "Then why stay?" he pressed gently. "It can't be easy managing all this alone." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the distant mountains gold. "This land is mine," she said finally. "Truly mine in a way nothing else has ever been. In Philadelphia, I lived in rented rooms, worked in someone else's shop, always beholden to others for my very existence." She gestured to the farm spread before them. "Here, I answer to no one. Everything I grow because I choose to. Every improvement I make is by my own decision. That kind of independence is worth the hardship." Owen found himself nodding. "I understand that better than you might think." She turned to look at him, really look at him in a way that made his heart beat a little faster. "I believe you do." The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken. Then Olivia stood, breaking the spell. "It's getting late. We both need rest if we're going to finish planting the south field tomorrow." "Olivia," Owen said as she reached for the door, "thank you, not just for taking me in, but for this." He gestured between them, struggling to find the right words. "For treating me like a partner, not just a hired hand." Her expression softened. "You're welcome, Owen. Good night." As spring progressed toward summer, Owen found himself thinking less and less about Abilene and more about the life he was building here with Olivia. It wasn't his original plan, but there was a satisfaction in the work they did together that he hadn't expected. The wound in his side healed completely, leaving only a puckered scar as a reminder of that night. His strength returned fully, allowing him to tackle the harder tasks around the farm, replacing the cabin roof, digging a new outhouse pit, breaking ground for an expansion of the vegetable garden. Olivia's initial reserve gradually melted away. She smiled more often, laughed more freely, and began to share more of herself with him. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a bookbinder and his wife, both of whom died in a fire that consumed their shop and home when Olivia was 16. How she'd supported herself as a seamstress until meeting Thomas Porter, a cabinet maker with dreams of the West, at the age of 22. "He was kind," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, Owen whittling a new handle for one of her kitchen knives while she mended a shirt. "Not passionate or particularly handsome, but steady and good-hearted. We were friends before we were anything more." Owen glanced up from his whittling. "You loved him." It wasn't a question, but Olivia nodded anyway. "In my way, yes. It wasn't the grand romance girls dream of, but it was real and solid. We were building something together." She paused, her needle hovering over the fabric. His death was unexpected. Pneumonia took him so quickly. One day he was coughing but still working, the next he was burning with fever, and 3 days later he was gone. "I'm sorry," Owen said softly. "That kind of loss, it stays with you." "It does," she agreed. "But life continues whether we're ready for it or not. The crops still need tending, the animals still need feeding." She resumed her sewing. "What about you? Have you ever been married?" Owen shook his head. "Never found the time or the right woman. The ranch kept me busy, and then after we lost it, I was focused on starting over." He ran his thumb along the edge of the knife handle, testing its smoothness. "My mother used to say I was too particular for my own good." "And were you? Particular, I mean." He considered the question. "Maybe, or maybe I just hadn't met someone who made me want to change my ways." Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't the first time Owen had felt this pull toward Olivia, this sense that there could be something more between them than friendship or a working partnership. But he was careful not to overstep. She had offered him shelter and work, not her heart. The moment was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Both of them tensed. Visitors were rare, and unexpected ones even rarer, especially after dark. Owen set aside his whittling and stood, gesturing for Olivia to stay seated. "I'll get it." He opened the door to find a man in a sheriff's badge standing on the porch, his horse tethered to the rail. "Evening," the man said, removing his hat. "Sheriff Wilson from Clearwater Creek. I'm looking for Mrs. Porter." Olivia appeared at Owen's side. "I'm Olivia Porter, Sheriff." "What can I do for you?" The sheriff's eyes flicked between them, clearly assessing their relationship before settling back on Olivia. "Madam, I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but I'm spreading the word. There's been more trouble with that gang of rustlers. They hit the Donovan place last night, took their cattle, and burned the barn. Mr. Donovan was badly beaten when he tried to stop them." Owen felt his jaw tighten. "The same gang that's been working this area for months," the sheriff nodded. "We think so. They're getting bolder, more violent. I'm organizing a posse to track them down, but in the meantime, I'm advising everyone to be extra vigilant." He looked pointedly at Owen. "You might want to keep a weapon handy, Mr. Xanders. Owen Xanders." Recognition flashed in the sheriff's eyes. "You the fella who was attacked about a month back, lost a herd headed for Abilene." "That's me." "Thought your description sounded familiar. One of my deputies found your horse about 10 miles south of here, wandering with no rider. We figured you were dead." The sheriff looked him up and down. "Glad to see that's not the case. My horse is alive." Owen couldn't hide his surprise. "Was," the sheriff corrected. "Deputy Johnson took him in, but the animal was stolen from his stable 3 days later, likely the same gang." The news that Copper had survived the attack, only to be stolen later, was a bitter pill. That horse had been with Owen for 5 years, one of the few things he'd managed to keep when the ranch was lost. "If you're staying in the area, Mr. Xanders, I could use men for the posse," the sheriff continued. "We're meeting in town tomorrow at noon." Before Owen could respond, Olivia spoke up. "He won't be joining your posse, Sheriff. We have a farm to run." The sheriff raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "As you wish, madam. Just be careful, both of you. These men are dangerous." After the sheriff left, Owen turned to Olivia. "You didn't need to answer for me," her eyes flashed. "Didn't I? Were you planning to ride off with that posse, leaving me to manage everything here alone after I've come to depend on your help?" Owen ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Those men took everything I had, Olivia. They nearly killed me, and now they're hurting other people. And what would going after them accomplish except putting you in danger again?" She stepped closer, her expression fierce. "You're not a lawman, Owen. You're one man with a grudge. That's a recipe for getting yourself killed. So I just let them get away with it." His voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "I just accept that everything I worked for is gone and do nothing." "Yes." Olivia's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Because you're alive, and that matters more than cattle or revenge. Because," she broke off, turning away from him. "Because what, Olivia?" She was silent for a long moment, her back to him, shoulders rigid. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "Because I can't lose someone else I care about. Not again." The anger drained out of Owen in an instant. He moved to stand behind her, close enough to feel the warmth of her body but not touching her. "Olivia, look at me." Slowly, she turned to face him. There were no tears in her eyes, but the emotion there was raw and unguarded in a way he'd never seen before. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "I gave you my word I'd stay through the harvest, and I mean to keep it." Relief washed over her features, followed quickly by embarrassment. "I shouldn't have spoken for you. It wasn't my place." "Maybe it was," Owen said, taking one of her hands in his. It was the first time he'd touched her outside of the practicalities of work or her tending his wound, and he felt her start slightly at the contact. "Maybe it is your place." Her eyes widened at his words, understanding their implication. For a heartbeat, they stood there, connected by their clasped hands and something much deeper that had been growing between them for weeks. Then Olivia gently pulled her hand away. "It's late," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We should get some rest." Owen let her go, knowing that pushing further tonight would be a mistake. Whatever was developing between them needed time to unfold naturally. "Good night, Olivia." As he made his way to his room, Owen found himself smiling despite the news the sheriff had brought. Olivia cared for him, she'd admitted as much, and he was beginning to realize just how much he cared for her in return. The next morning, they worked side by side in the fields, neither mentioning the moment they'd shared the night before. But something had shifted between them, a new awareness, a current of possibility that hummed in the air whenever their eyes met or their hands brushed accidentally. By midday, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, promising a storm. They hurried to finish the planting they'd started, racing against the approaching weather. The first fat raindrops began to fall just as they reached the porch, laughing and breathless from their sprint across the yard. "Perfect timing," Olivia said, pushing damp strands of hair from her face. Her cheeks were flushed from exertion, her eyes bright with laughter, and Owen thought she had never looked more beautiful. Without thinking, he reached out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. Her laughter faded as his fingers lingered against her cheek, but she didn't pull away. "Olivia," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. The sky chose that moment to open up completely, sending sheets of rain cascading off the porch roof. The sudden downpour broke the spell, and Olivia stepped back, her expression a mixture of confusion and something else, something that looked remarkably like longing. "We should get inside," she said, turning toward the door. The storm continued through the afternoon and into the evening, the rain drumming on the roof and the wind howling around the corners of the cabin. They ate dinner in relative quiet, the tension between them almost palpable. As Olivia cleared the dishes, Owen moved to stoke the fire, trying to give her space while also wishing desperately that they could return to the easy companionship they'd developed. "I think I'll turn in early," Olivia said when the kitchen was tidy. "It's been a long day." Owen nodded, disappointed but understanding. "Good night, then." She hesitated at the threshold of her bedroom. "Owen." "Yes, I'm glad you're here." The words were simple, but the way she said them with a quiet intensity that reached across the room made his heart swell. "So am I," he replied honestly. She gave him a small smile, then disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Owen sat by the fire for a long time after she left, listening to the storm and thinking about how his life had changed since that night he'd collapsed on her doorstep. He'd come to Montana with one dream to build his own ranch, but now he was beginning to dream of something different. A life here with Olivia, building something together just as she had planned to do with Thomas. But was that what she wanted? And even if it was, would she ever allow herself to act on it? The questions circled in his mind until exhaustion finally drove him to his own bed. He fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof and dreams of a future he hadn't imagined a month ago. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. The rain was a blessing for the newly planted fields but made outside work impossible. Owen and Olivia spent the day indoors, catching up on repairs and chores that had been pushed aside during the spring planting. By the second day, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, and Owen ventured out to check for any damage. The creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property had swollen but not overflowed its banks, and aside from a few fallen branches and soggy ground, the farm had weathered the storm well. He was returning from checking the livestock when he noticed a rider approaching from the south. As the figure drew closer, Owen recognized Sheriff Wilson, hunched against the drizzle, his horse plodding steadily through the mud. Owen waited on the porch as the sheriff dismounted and tied his horse to the rail. "Sheriff," he greeted the man. "What brings you back so soon, Mr. Xanders?" The sheriff nodded, removing his hat and shaking the water from it. "Is Mrs. Porter around?" "I'm here," Olivia said, appearing in the doorway behind Owen. "Come in out of the rain, Sheriff." Once inside, the sheriff accepted a cup of coffee gratefully. "Thank you, madam. It's a miserable day to be riding, but I thought you should know." He took a sip of coffee before continuing. The posse tracked the rustlers to an abandoned mining camp about 20 miles northwest of here. There was a fight. We lost 2 men, but we got 3 of the gang, including their leader. Owen leaned forward. "You caught them?" The sheriff nodded grimly. "The ones we didn't kill. 2 are in custody back in Clearwater Creek, waiting for the circuit judge." He turned to Olivia. "The reason I came to tell you specifically, madam, is that we found some papers among their things. Deeds to properties in this area, including yours." "My deed?" Olivia's face paled. "How would they have gotten that?" "They didn't have the actual deeds, just copies of land office records. It appears they were targeting specific properties all owned by women alone or elderly couples, properties they thought would be easy to take." The sheriff's expression hardened. This wasn't just a gang of rustlers. They were systematically driving people off their land so they could claim it for themselves. Owen felt a cold fury building in his chest. They were going to come after Olivia's farm next. "It looks that way," the sheriff confirmed. "Though the storm probably delayed their plans." He finished his coffee and stood. "In any case, the threat is over now. The remaining gang members fled the territory according to what we got out of the prisoners." After the sheriff left, promising to return the copied deed records once the trial was over, Olivia sat heavily in a chair. "I never thought. I mean, rustlers are one thing, but trying to drive people off their land." Owen knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "It's over now. You're safe." She squeezed his hands tightly. "We both are." The realization that Olivia had been targeted, that she might have faced the same violence that had nearly killed him, shook Owen deeply. The thought of anything happening to her was unbearable. In that moment, kneeling beside her chair with their hands intertwined, Owen knew with absolute certainty that he loved Olivia Porter. Not just as a friend or partner, but completely, with a depth that surprised him. He wanted to tell her to lay his heart bare, but the words caught in his throat. It was too soon, he told himself. She needed time. Instead, he simply held her hands and promised, "I won't let anything happen to you or this farm, Olivia. Not while I'm here." The look she gave him then full of trust, and something deeper gave him hope that perhaps she might come to feel the same way. As May turned to June, the farm flourished under their combined care. The crops grew tall and strong, the chickens produced eggs in abundance, and the small vegetable garden yielded more than enough for their table, with extra to sell in town. They made the trip to Clearwater Creek together once every 2 weeks, loading the wagon with eggs, vegetables, and the beautiful quilts Olivia made in the evenings. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to purchase supplies they couldn't produce themselves: coffee, sugar, flour, ammunition. On these trips, Owen noticed how the townspeople had begun to treat them as a couple. Shopkeepers would ask after Mrs. Porter and her man, and the women at the general store would give Olivia knowing smiles when Owen carried her purchases to the wagon. Neither of them corrected these assumptions, though they hadn't spoken directly about what was growing between them. It was as if they both feared that naming it might somehow break the delicate balance they'd achieved, but things couldn't remain in this state of suspension forever. Owen knew that. The harvest would come, and with it, the end of their arrangement. He would have to make a decision, and so would she. The catalyst came on a sweltering July afternoon. They had been working since dawn, taking advantage of the cooler morning hours, but by midday, the heat was oppressive. Olivia suggested they break until evening when the temperature would drop. "The creek will be cool," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "I usually swim on days like this." Owen raised an eyebrow. "Swim? I didn't know you could swim," she laughed. "There's a deep pool about a quarter-mile downstream. Thomas built a small dock there our first summer. It's private enough." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I could show you if you'd like, though we'd have to take turns, of course." The thought of cool water was too tempting to resist, even with the awkwardness of sharing a swimming hole. "Lead the way." The creek widened and deepened at a natural bend, creating a pool perhaps 30 feet across and deep enough in the middle that Owen couldn't see the bottom. A small wooden dock extended a few feet into the water, weathered but sturdy. "It's perfect," Owen said, already feeling cooler in the shade of the tall cottonwoods that surrounded the pool. "I'll go first if you don't mind," Olivia said. "I'll be quick and then it's all yours." Owen nodded, turning to head back toward the trail. "I'll wait up there." "Thank you," she called after him. He found a fallen log a discreet distance away and sat, trying very hard not to think about Olivia swimming in the creek. It was a losing battle. Over the past months, his feelings for her had only deepened, and the physical attraction he felt was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, Olivia's voice carried up from the creek. "It's all yours, Owen." He made his way back down to find her sitting on the dock, her feet dangling in the water. Her hair was wet and slicked back from her face, and she wore a simple cotton dress that clung slightly to her damp skin. "It's wonderful," she said, smiling up at him. "Go on, I'll wait here." Owen hesitated only briefly before removing his boots and shirt. He kept his trousers on, though the idea of swimming fully clothed seemed impractical. "You don't have to wait," he offered. "I can find my way back." "I don't mind," she replied, her eyes briefly dropping to his bare chest before returning to his face. "Unless you'd prefer privacy." "No," he said too quickly. "I mean, I don't mind if you stay." He dove in from the end of the dock, the shock of the cool water against his sun-heated skin exhilarating. When he surfaced, pushing wet hair from his eyes, he found Olivia watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're right," he called to her. "It is wonderful." He swam for several minutes, washing away the sweat and dust of the morning's work. When he finally pulled himself up onto the dock beside Olivia, water streaming from his hair and trousers, she handed him a small towel. "Thank you for showing me this place," he said, drying his face and hair. "I should have done it sooner," she replied. "It's too pleasant to keep to myself." They sat in companionable silence, feet dangling in the water, shoulders almost but not quite touching. The only sounds were the gentle lap of water against the dock, the buzz of insects, and the occasional call of a bird. "I've been thinking," Owen said finally, breaking the quiet, "about after the harvest." Olivia's body tensed slightly beside him. "Oh, yes." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I'm not sure Abilene is where I should go anymore." She turned to look at him, her eyes questioning. "Where would you go instead?" "Nowhere," Owen said simply. "I'd like to stay here, Olivia, with you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Why? It was such a simple question, but the answer was anything but simple. Owen chose his words carefully. "Because in these past months I've come to care for you. More than care, I've come to love you, Olivia, and I hope that you might feel something for me too." The silence that followed his declaration seemed to stretch forever. Olivia looked down at her hands, then out across the water, then finally back to him. "I do," she admitted softly. "Feel something for you, I mean. But Owen, I never expected this. When I took you in that night, I was just helping a man in need. I never thought that we'd come to mean something to each other." He finished when she trailed off. She nodded. "It's frightening how much I've come to depend on you being here, not just for the help with the farm, but for everything else. The conversations, the companionship." A small smile touched her lips. "The way you always know when I need quiet and when I need to talk. The way you remember how I take my coffee without asking." Hope bloomed in Owen's chest. "Is it so frightening to need someone?" "Yes," she said honestly, "because I've lost everyone I've ever needed. My parents, Thomas. What if I let myself love you and then you're gone too?" Owen reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me, Olivia. Life doesn't offer those guarantees, but I can promise that I won't leave willingly. Not ever." She looked down at their joined hands. "What are you suggesting exactly?" "Whatever you want," he said. "We could continue as we are partners in running this farm. Or," he hesitated, then pressed on, "or we could be more. We could build a life together properly, as husband and wife." Olivia's sharp intake of breath was the only sound for several heartbeats. Then slowly she raised her eyes to his. "Are you asking me to marry you, Owen Xanders?" "I am," he said, his voice steady despite the wild pounding of his heart. "I love you, Olivia. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Tears filled her eyes, but they were accompanied by a smile that took his breath away. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Owen's heart soared. He cupped her face in his hands, searching her eyes for any doubt and finding none. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question and an answer all at once. But when Olivia's arms slid around his neck, pulling him closer, it deepened into something more, a promise, a beginning. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he admitted. Olivia laughed softly. "So have I just didn't think I could. And now." "Now," she said, brushing her lips against his again. "I think I can do whatever we decide to do together." They were married 2 weeks later in Clearwater Creek, with the sheriff and his wife as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, but as Owen slipped a plain gold band onto Olivia's finger purchased with money from selling an extra pig they'd raised, he felt as rich as any cattle baron. "I, Owen, take you, Olivia, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Olivia's eyes shone as she repeated the vows, her hand trembling slightly in his. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering of townspeople who had heard about the wedding and decided to attend burst into applause. "Didn't think we'd see Mrs. Porter smile like that again," one woman remarked loudly enough for Owen to hear as they left the church. "That man must be something special." "He is," Olivia confirmed, looking up at him with such love that Owen felt his heart might burst. The harvest that year was bountiful, better than any Olivia had seen since coming to Montana. With Owen's help, they brought in every bushel of wheat, every ear of corn, filling the barn to capacity. "We'll have enough to sell and still keep plenty for ourselves," Olivia said as they stood surveying their work. "And money to buy those breeding cattle you've been talking about." Owen pulled her into his arms, still marveling at the fact that he could do so whenever he wished now. "Are you sure about the cattle? It's your farm." "Our farm," she corrected. "And yes, I'm sure. You said yourself that diversifying makes sense. Crops can fail, but with livestock as well, we'll always have something to fall back on." He kissed her soundly. "You're a wise woman, Mrs. Xanders," she laughed against his lips. "And you're a lucky man, Mr. Xanders." "The luckiest," he agreed, and meant it with every fiber of his being. That winter was harsh, with snow piling up against the cabin walls and temperatures dropping so low that the creek froze solid. But inside, Owen and Olivia were warm and content, wrapped in the love they had found in each other and the life they were building together. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Owen reading aloud from one of their books while Olivia worked on a new quilt, this one for the cradle Owen was building in secret, hoping that by spring they might have news of a child on the way. "Do you ever regret it?" Olivia asked one night as they lay in bed, her head resting on his chest. "Not going to Abilene, not starting your own ranch." Owen's arms tightened around her. "Not for a second," he said truthfully. "This is where I belong, with you." She raised herself up on one elbow to look at him, her hair falling around them like a curtain. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now," her smile was radiant in the dim light, "now I know it was just beginning." Spring came early that year, bringing with it the news Owen had been hoping for. Olivia was expecting their first child, due in the late fall. "A harvest baby," Owen said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Perfect timing." With the profits from the previous year's harvest and the sale of extra eggs and vegetables in town, they purchased a small herd of cattle, 10 cows and a bull, just as they had planned. Owen built additional corrals and expanded the barn, preparing for the growth of both their farm and their family. As Olivia's pregnancy progressed, Owen took on more of the physical work, insisting that she rest when needed. But Olivia was strong and determined, continuing to manage the household and the lighter farm chores well into her 8th month. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," she would say whenever Owen tried to coddle her too much. But she didn't protest when he insisted on rubbing her feet in the evenings or when he took over the more strenuous household tasks. Their son, Thomas Owen Xanders, was born on a clear, cold November day in 1876 with the help of the midwife from Clearwater Creek. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment Owen first held him, he was completely besotted. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, cradling his son while Olivia rested. "Absolutely perfect." The baby wrapped his tiny hand around Owen's finger, holding on with surprising strength. Owen felt tears prick his eyes as he looked down at this miracle, this life he and Olivia had created together. Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby's arrival. The winter passed in a blur of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and moments of pure joy as they watched their son grow and develop. By spring, little Thomas was sitting up, reaching for everything within his grasp and filling the cabin with his giggles. The farm prospered alongside their family. The cattle herd grew with the birth of calves, the crops flourished, and they added more chickens and a pair of milk cows. They hired help during the busiest seasons now, able to afford it with their increasing success. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Owen surprised Olivia with a locket containing a tiny portrait of Thomas that he had commissioned during their last trip to town. "Oh, Owen," she breathed, touching the delicate gold pendant. "It's beautiful. Open it," he urged. Inside, alongside the portrait, was a small inscription. "To Olivia, who gave shelter for one night in a lifetime of love. Forever yours, Owen." Tears filled her eyes as she read the words. "You remember what I said that first night, about giving you shelter?" Owen nodded, taking her hands in his. "I remember everything about that night. How could I forget? It changed my life." Olivia leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "Mine too, in the best possible way." As the years passed, their family and their farm continued to grow. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them 2 years after Thomas, followed by another son, James, 3 years later. The cattle herd expanded to 50 head, then 100, making the Xanders place one of the most successful in the county. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original cabin as a reminder of where their story began. Olivia's quilts became known throughout the territory for their beauty and craftsmanship, bringing an additional income that they used to improve the property and set aside for their children's futures. Owen never did make it to Abilene. He found everything he needed right there in Montana: a home, a purpose, a family, and a love deeper and more enduring than any he could have imagined. That night he collapsed, wounded and desperate, on Olivia's doorstep. On their 20th anniversary, with their children nearly grown and the farm prosperous beyond their wildest dreams, Owen and Olivia returned to the creek where he had first declared his love. The dock had been rebuilt several times over the years, but the pool remained the same: clear, cool, and secluded. You ever wonder what would have happened if those rustlers hadn't attacked you that night? Olivia asked as they sat side by side, feet dangling in the water just as they had all those years ago. "If you had made it to Abilene with your cattle?" Owen considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I realize it doesn't matter. All roads would have led me back to you eventually." "I believe that with all my heart." Olivia rested her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his. "I used to think Thomas's death was the end of everything," she said softly. "But it wasn't. It was just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a better one." Owen kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "The best one," he corrected, "and it's still being written." As they walked hand in hand back to their home, where their children waited and the life they had built together continued to flourish, Owen knew with absolute certainty that he had found what every man seeks but few truly find: not just success or prosperity, but love, belonging, and the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. What had begun as a desperate plea for shelter on a cold Montana night had become a lifetime of love, proving once again that the greatest journeys often begin with a single step, or in Owen's case, a single collapse on a kind woman's doorstep. And as the sun set over the land they had nurtured together, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Owen and Olivia Xanders walked toward home, toward family, toward the future they continued to build, one day, one season, one year at a time together.